The subcommittee will come to order. Before we begin, I'd like to ask unanimous consent for our colleagues, Congresswoman Jackie Walorski from Indiana and Congressman Ron Kind from Wisconsin, to sit on the dais and participate in today's proceedings. Without objection, so ordered. Good morning, and thank you all for joining us for today's legislative hearing. There are 9 bills on our agenda this morning and 3 panels of witnesses ahead of us, so I'll keep my comments short in the interest of time. The bills and legislative proposals that we will discuss this morning address a number of critical issues facing our veterans and the federal agency tasked with caring for them, the Department of Veterans Affairs. Those issues include how to help struggling VA medical facilities, how to increase access to care for wounded warriors and those who have experienced military sexual trauma, how to improve the quality of the adaptive equipment provided to disabled veterans, and how to add fairness to the VA's broken billing system. I'm particularly interested in our discussion surrounding Vice Chairman Bill Araka's draft bill, the Promise Act, which would address the over-reliance of opioid medication amongst our veterans. This subcommittee has been and will continue to be aggressive in our oversight of VA's pain management programs. To be sure, chronic pain is complex and difficult to treat, and prescription medication overuse is a national problem that is not unique to the VA healthcare system, but far too many of our veterans are going to VA facilities looking for ways to cope with their pain and being given nothing more than multiple prescriptions for high-risk medications. Some of these same veterans come to the VA already heavily reliant on a cocktail of medications initiated in treatment while on active duty. Tragically, some of these veterans have lost their lives as a result of simply taking their medication as prescribed, or in some cases have succumbed to the dangers of having too many high-potency opiates readily and fatally available. One of those veterans is Jason Simikowski, who inspired the Promise Act and its companion bill in the Senate. We are too late to help Jason or to ease the anguish that his family, including his wife Heather and his father Martin, who have submitted statements for the record, have been left with. But we can promise to do better for those that come after him, and I believe that the Promise Act can help get us there. The last bill on our agenda today is a draft legislative proposal from the Department that would grant the VA the authority to enter in provider agreements. This is similar to a bill, H.R. 1369, that the subcommittee considered in a legislative hearing earlier this year. Provider agreement authority may in fact be critical to moving VA forward, but we must be careful that we do not take a short-sighted approach to solving one problem that VA is facing and as a result create a whole host of others. When considering whether to allow provider agreements that are not subject to the traditional federal acquisition regulation checks and balances, I want to be sure that appropriate controls are in place to protect our veterans and the taxpayer dollars that are supporting them. I am grateful to the sponsors of the bills that are being considered today and to all of our witnesses from our veteran service organizations and the VA for being here to share their views. I look forward to hearing their testimony. And now yield to the ranking member, Ms. Brownlee, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for calling this hearing today. It's important for us to, I think, review the legislation that's been referred to this subcommittee, and it's important to hear from our colleagues on their priorities and to hear all views on how to best protect the health of those men and women who dedicate their lives to protecting this nation. I wanted to just highlight 3 bills today that I am a co-author on, and the first is Mr. O'Rourke's bill, which I believe will greatly improve and enhance the way we survey our veterans to get the data that we need to provide good policy in relationship to how well our veterans are served. Also, Mr. Peters' bill, which I believe, again, will enhance the VA's ability to hire more more marriage and family therapists to provide more resources and more professionals that we need for the mental health of our veterans. And finally, Ms. Walorski's bill, which would enhance adaptive technology in our automobiles to make sure that our veterans who need that will receive automobiles that are rated and classified, and support all three of those bills. I think all the bills before us are worthy, and I look forward to the testimony from our witnesses today and their views on how to improve upon the many bills that we are considering. So thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thanks. I'm honored to be joined this morning by several of my colleagues to speak in support of their legislation. With us today is the Honorable Beto O'Rourke from Texas, the Honorable Andy Barr from Kentucky, who's not quite here yet, the Honorable Matt Cartwright from Pennsylvania, the Honorable Scott Peters from California, the Honorable Martha Roby from Alabama, the Honorable Jackie Walorski from Indiana, the Honorable John Klein from Minnesota, who will shortly arrive, I hope, and the Honorable Gus Bilirakis from Florida. We are also joined by a veteran constituent of Mr. Barr's, Ms. Susan Mosley, who's apparently going to speak during Representative Barr's time about her personal experience accessing care from the VA. Thank you all for being here this morning, and thanks to Mrs. Mosley for your service. We will begin with Representative Bilirakis. Mr. Bilirakis, please explain your legislation.
I appreciate it very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for holding this hearing and agendaing my bill. Chairman Benešík and the Ranking Member Brownlee and distinguished members of the House Subcommittee and my colleagues over. Thank you for holding this legislative hearing today. Today's hearing includes many important pieces of legislation that will improve the services and care for our veterans, the care our veterans receive for their dedicated service to our great nation. Among the bills under consideration in today's hearing is my bill, the Promoting Responsible Opioid Management and Incorporating Scientific Expertise Act, or the Jason Simkowski Promise Act. I appreciate the Chairman's leadership to bring this important issue before the committee and for allowing me to speak today on the Promise Act. The tragic death of Marine Corps veteran Jason Simkowski in the Toma, Wisconsin VA medical facility prompted the need for congressional action. In August of 2015, nearly 1 year from Jason's death, the Office of Inspector General released a report titled Unexpected Death of a Patient During Treatment with Multiple Medications. The IG report concluded that Jason's cause of death was due to mixed drug toxicity with the potential for respiratory depression, and the combination of various medications was a plausible mechanism of action for a fatal outcome. Furthermore, the IG also found deficiencies in the informed consent process, confusion among staff when initiating cardiopulmonary resuscitation, and the absence of certain medications available in emergency situations to reverse effects of possible drug overdose. I request unanimous consent to submit this IG report, Mr. Chairman, for the record in today's hearing materials.
Without objection.
Thank you. As the guidelines used by the VA and DOD for opioid management have not been updated since 2010, it is due time to ensure those treating our veterans have the necessary resources and training to effectively treat veterans with chronic pain. I want to be clear, the intent of this bill is to improve patient safety, not to restrict access for those who truly need their prescriptions for their wellness plan. The Promise Act will increase safety for opioid therapy and pain management by requiring the VA and DOD to update the clinical practice guidelines for management of opioid therapy for chronic pain, ensuring VA opioid prescribers have enhanced pain management and safe opioid prescribing education and training, and ensuring encouraging the VA to increase information sharing with state licensing boards. We've discussed this in the past, Mr. Chairman. This bill also promotes needed transparency within the VA and will further our efforts to hold the VA accountable by requiring GAO to report on recommendations for improvements and assess the level of care veterans are receiving. Additionally, the Promise Act will authorize a program on integration of complementary and integrated health within the VA and encourage more outreach and awareness of the patient advocacy program to educate veterans on their care options. Our veterans have sacrificed so much for our country, and we have a responsibility to ensure they are receiving the quality of care they have earned and deserve. We must hold the VA accountable and encourage quality care for our veterans who have fought for the freedoms we enjoy on a daily basis. I want to thank the VSOs for their support and for appearing today to provide their testimony in today's legislative hearing. I also want to thank all my colleagues on this committee, in the committee, of course, in the whole House, for your sponsorship of this, co-sponsorship of this bill. And I appreciate it very much. Thanks for agendaing the bill. With this strong list of bipartisan support, we can send a clear message to the Simkakowski family, our veterans, and those that have been affected by such tragedies that we are dedicated to ensuring similar failures will never happen again. In closing, I'm grateful we are here discussing these important bills. I look forward to having substantive discussion on how we can improve the lives of our true American heroes. In upholding our sacred vow and promise to our veterans, I urge my colleagues to support this bill and co-sponsor the Promise Act. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. O'Rourke, you may proceed with your testimony. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam Ranking Member, for having this hearing and then allowing me the chance to discuss the bill that we're proposing, the Ask Veterans Act. And it is essentially based on experiences that we have had in the district I represent, El Paso, Texas, that I think are applicable to all of our districts. When I was sworn in 2013, I began to hold regular town hall meetings, and I was struck by the number of veterans who would attend them to tell me that they could not get in to get a primary or specialty or mental health care appointment. That was at direct odds to what I was hearing when I would follow up with the VA. The VA in El Paso told me that, you know, the vast majority of veterans seeking care were seen within 14 days, which at the time was the established basic minimum wait time for a veteran. And yet the complaints persisted. And the VA was almost saying, you know, what you're really dealing with here, Beto, are some cranky, ornery veterans. You know, some of these folks, you just can't make them happy. But, you know, you got to take our word for it. And here's the data. We're seeing everybody within the established period of time. Well, something just didn't add up. And so we commissioned an objective, scientific third-party survey with a margin of error under 4% to ask veterans directly what their experience has been at the VA. And what we were told confirmed, what we saw in the results confirms what we were told by the veterans, which is they were waiting far longer than the VA had told us they were waiting. To give you an idea, on average, this is an average, veterans in El Paso waited over 80 days for a primary care appointment, over 70 days for a mental health care appointment. And what was truly shocking and confirmed stories that I had a hard time believing when I was told by veterans when we first took office was that more than 1/3 of the veterans surveyed who tried to obtain a mental health care appointment could not obtain one at all. Not in 14 days, not 30 days, not a year, just not ever. And that data helped us to apply targeted pressure to the VA on where they needed to do a better job for veterans in our community. And to the VA's credit, they were very responsive to that. And they didn't resist the facts as told by the veterans. They have worked to try to make things better. We conducted this survey again this year, got similar results. There were some improvements, but people are waiting far too long, and there's still a crisis in access to mental health care. I think we learned after the Phoenix wait time scandal, and my experience in El Paso, and you may have similar experiences in your districts, that we cannot ask the VA how the VA is doing and always expect an honest answer. Shame on them the first time this happens, shame on us if it happens going forward. For us to truly hold them accountable, there needs to be an independent verification of the veterans' experience at each of the VA medical facilities in each of our districts. And so this bill would simply require that the VA contract with an independent third party to assess true wait times, not the preferred wait times, which I still don't understand how that works, but from the moment you, the veteran, request an appointment until that appointment is actually granted, you're actually seeing your provider, not when it was scheduled, but when you're seeing the provider. We want to measure that wait time. We want to measure wait times across primary, specialty, and mental health care. And we want to measure veterans' satisfaction with the care that they received both at the VA and care that they received in the community. This bill also requires that the VA work with veteran service organizations in each of our communities to make sure that we're asking the right questions, that we're getting at concerns that VSOs and veterans have with the quality and access and timeliness of health care in a given community. And then the VA must publish these reports publicly on the web for everyone to see and to be held accountable. And so that, in essence, is a very short, simple bill. That, in essence, is what the Ask Veterans Act would do. And with that, I yield back.
Thanks. Nice. Mr. Barr, I'm going to yield to you for 30 seconds and then to Ms. Mosley for 4 minutes and 30 seconds.
Thank you, Chairman Benishek and committee members, for allowing me the opportunity to present my legislation. H.R. 1603, the Military Sexual Assault Victims Empowerment Act, also referred to as the Military Save Act. 2 years ago, several veterans visited my district office to share with me their powerful and heartfelt stories. They told me about how they had survived military sexual trauma during their service, but now faced with the task of navigating the bureaucracy at the VA, they explained that they were unable to access the individual care that they needed from the VA. I would like to introduce one of those veterans, Specialist Susan Mosley of the U.S. Army, who helped inspire me to introduce the Military Save Act. She is a courageous woman, a survivor of military sexual trauma, and I am pleased to introduce her to the committee today.
Good afternoon. I'm so grateful to be in front of you all today. I entered into the military over almost 20 years ago. I went in like the typical youngster does, not knowing what you want to do with your life. Going through basic training and AIT for your schooling, I thrived. It was the most amazing experience I ever had in my life. Then I showed up to my permanent duty station in El Paso, Texas at Fort Bliss, where I was instructed which unit I would be going to. There was a female soldier that was there, and she said, "I'm sorry to tell you, but you're going to Foxtrot." I thought, what does that mean? She said, "You need to find a boyfriend. Top's pretty handsy and likes girls like you." I was taken aback. Really? This is my future? I spent 6 months working very diligently to learn my job, be a good soldier, and represent the people that I was there to serve. I was a Patriot Missile Systems and a Patriot Missile Systems battery, which we rotated in and out of Southwest Asia, and I was first assaulted within 6 months of arriving at my permanent duty station by the top-ranking enlisted member of our unit, the first sergeant, or top, as many enlisted people call him. Then I began to avoid him, try to do everything that I could to do my job and stay away from him. So then he decided to move me into being his assistant. So I was in the CQ, and my office was directly across from his. I spent long periods of time in trying to turn it around and instead of him manipulating me manipulate him into how, if I was going to be assaulted, it was going to be on my terms. So instead of him raping me at my desk, I would say, "Okay, I'll give you a little handy J." That was the only way I could get to the point that I wouldn't be torn down to nothing. My dignity was lost, and I had no idea how I was going to get through it. In the military, you're told where to go, what to do, how to dress, and where to be. The only thing you couldn't, or the only thing that no one could control for me was what I ate. So I developed an eating disorder. And when I developed that eating disorder, it was the only sense of power I had. Once they realized that I had a problem, they sent me to the Army hospital, which decided to send me to a treatment facility. My commander-in-top showed up at the hospital that day, and when I was at the lowest of low, knowing that I had no power and no control over my life, my top whispered in my ear, "We're good, right?" Which meant, "You're not going to say anything." I said, "Yeah, we're fine." But I knew I had to do something. I'm not the kind of person to sit back and allow someone to violate me and let that be okay. I knew that my end of service time was coming, and after I came back from treatment, I walked into my commander's office and I informed him that I wanted to press charges. I was then sent to CID, where I was given a lie detector test. A lie detector test as a victim. I passed that lie detector test, and my end of term of service came, and I was leaving to come home to Kentucky when the major in the unit ran out into the parking lot when I was getting into a vehicle to leave and called me, "You lying whore and slut, how dare you say things," to which many people which were in my unit began to join in with him. So my exit from the military was being called a whore, after I had been in Southwest Asia and done everything I could to support and defend the United States of America. When I came back, my transition coming out of the military and into the VA was quite difficult. I went into a reclusive state that many of us go into, where we just avoid everything. I didn't know what had happened to me, had a name to it. There was something that happened to me, and I could go and I could get help. The VA did not help with that process for me. I eventually, after about 16 years, found a therapist who had been trained in Bay Pines, which is at the VA there, who specializes in military sexual trauma and knew how to treat us. We were given the opportunity to have great treatment, but we could only be seen every 3 weeks by her, and she, on every Friday, gave up her lunch so we could have a group time, because that was all the VA could offer us. We had those groups until she left the VA. At that point in time, she agreed to see some of us at her home. Many of us that live out of certain areas get travel pay to come to the VA. But if you went to go see Karen at her home, you could not receive that travel pay, which meant getting and receiving and maintaining that continuity of care was broken because people could not go and see her. The therapists that were introduced to us once Karen left had little to no training, and when you have been so violated to the core, it takes several visits before you can even begin to trust the therapist that is sitting in front of you. I was told that I could be seen once a month. How could a new person I had never known see me once a month and think that I could overcome and be a more productive member of society? It just doesn't happen that way. You have to have more access to care and be able to be treated as needed. Unfortunately, in the not too recent, it was probably about 6 months ago, we had a member of our group who committed suicide. She shot herself in the stomach. She left a note to her son, which said she did it this way so she could die slowly because she thought that that's what she deserved. After wearing a uniform, that's what she deserves? That's what she deserves, to die slowly? I've had many problems at the VA where I've been required to take off my clothing. That's a very uncomfortable position for people like me. So I decided I was going to do something about it, and I went to my state representative, who led me to Congressman Barr. This legislation is so important for us to be able to go to these specialists that can help us. In Lexington, Kentucky, there are no it took fee-for-service almost 6 months to find me a female doctor to go see for one of my problems. There are many things many doctor positions that need to be filled by females. There needs to be a priority in hiring and a priority in healthcare for us to be able to walk in the door and be treated by females. When I went into the emergency room, I sat for 7 hours, and I was told by a female, I was lucky there was a female that was on duty that day. Really? In a whole hospital, there's not any more than one female that day? It needs to be a priority that there's a female in every specialty that is available to every veteran, so that no matter when you have a problem, you can have these problems addressed, so that you can go out and you can do the things that you need to do to be a good parent. I can say without a doubt, and it probably will choke me up, but I can truly say that if my daughter hadn't been born, I too probably would have been one of those statistics that would have I just wouldn't be here. And my daughter's given me the strength to go out. Still to this day, I struggle with triggers. I have to every day go out. I have to think about where I'm going, who I'm gonna be around, what's gonna happen. Is there an entry? Is there an exit? Is everything in my mind is that MST brain that I have, because I have to figure out constantly, am I safe? I had to stop getting on People Finder.
You have very compelling testimony, and I really appreciate you being here, but
I understand.
unfortunately, we have a time situation where we want to hear from everyone, but thank you very much
Thank you.
for being here, Ms. Mosley. Mr. Cartwright? You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Benishek, Ranking Member Brownlee, and members of the committee, thank you for including today H.R. 1904, the Wounded Warrior Workforce Enhancement Act, as part of your hearing today, and for the opportunity to speak to the subcommittee about this very important piece of legislation. I want to say it is an honor for me to appear before the Veterans Affairs Committee and its Health Subcommittee. I also want to express my gratitude to the American Orthotics and Prosthetics Association, as well as to Senator Durbin, as they have been instrumental in focusing attention on this critical issue facing our nation's veterans. The field of orthotics and prosthetics is at a critical tipping point in terms of the future viability of its workforce and the ability of those professionals to provide the best tailored care to our nation's service members and veterans. In its testimony, the American Orthotics and Prosthetics Association stated that there has there's been an approximate 300% increase in the number of veterans with amputations served by the VA since the year 2000. Unfortunately, currently, only 7,100 practitioners specially trained in O&P nationwide serve more than 80,000 veterans with amputations. Of those trained practitioners, only 1 in 5 is either past retirement age or is eligible to retire in the next 5 years. So we have a dwindling workforce we're working with. However, there are only 13 schools around the country with master's degree programs in this field, with the largest program supporting fewer than 50 students. And with the growing demand of amputee treatment outpacing the number of new practitioners trained to replace an aging workforce, it's clear we must act now to meet our moral obligation of providing our heroes with the best health care available. The Wounded Warrior Workforce Enhancement Act is a cost-effective approach to assisting universities in creating or expanding accredited master's degree programs in orthotics and prosthetics. Specifically, this bill addresses these issues by authorizing a competitive grant program of $5 million a year for 3 years to help colleges and universities develop master's degree programs focusing on orthotics and prosthetics. The bill also requires the VA to establish a center of excellence in prosthetic and orthotic education to provide evidence-based research on the knowledge, skills, and training clinical professionals need to care for veterans. This past week, I actually ran into a professional in orthotics, and he introduced himself as an orthotist, and I didn't know what that was, but all of the physicians on the panel already knew what that was. And then I explained this bill to him, and he was very grateful, a gentleman from Nashville, Tennessee, actually. These prosthetic and orthotic treatments serve soldiers who suffered limb loss injuries because they put their bodies on the line for our country, and as a result, have their lives forever changed. With Veterans Day just last week, it's a very good reminder to us all just how much we owe to our wounded warriors. Again, I want to express my gratitude, Mr. Chairman Benishek, Ranking Member Brownlee, and members of this committee for your consideration of this bill today and for bringing attention to the important issue of providing veterans with the very best possible prosthetic and orthotic treatment available. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Representative Peters, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Brownlee, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me here to discuss the Marriage and Family Therapists for Veterans Act. So we all know that the veterans, and you mentioned this before, the VA is challenged to meet the need for counselors, among which are marriage and family therapists, or MFTs. And in 2006, Congress enacted legislation that permits the VA to employ licensed MFTs. But the problem is that the VA takes a very restrictive view of which MFTs it can employ. It limits its pool to MFTs that graduate from a school that has been specifically accredited by a certain accreditation organization, the Commission on Accreditation for Marriage and Family Therapy Education, or COAMFTE, a nationwide accreditation. What it excludes is a number of MFTs who've graduated from schools that have long relied on established regional accreditation systems. These systems existed long before the COAM-FTE accreditation was even established. So unfortunately, the VA's interpretation, their limitation to that one accreditation system, means that MFTs who are qualified to practice in their home states can't walk across the street and apply for a job to work at the local VA for an MFT opening. So my bill would simply specify that the VA can hire state-accredited MFTs in addition to the ones that have graduated from schools that are accredited by COAM-FTE. In Florida, for instance, there's only one school that meets the VA's qualification standards, which excludes a major portion of graduates from that state. Florida's situation is similar to California and New York. At this time, the California licensure and accreditation process has been established for 15 years with well-trained and qualified individuals heading into the job market, but because of this interpretation by the VA, they're not eligible to work at the VA. So the bill simply opens up the employment eligibility to those who have the proper training. It does not require additional work on the part of the VA. It preserves the VA's discretion over who they hire. It just enlarges the pool from which they can select applicants. So I appreciate the support the bill has already gotten from members here and look forward to working with everyone here to enhance the care our veterans receive. Thank you for the work you do, and thanks for your consideration.
Thanks. Representative Roby, please go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, thank you for your time today, and the other members of this subcommittee for your consideration of H.R. 3234, the Failing VA Medical Center Recovery Act. As you recall, we've had major problems for an extended period of time in my district at the Central Alabama Veterans Health Care System. We call it CAVIS. The litany of scandals captured national headlines: unacceptable wait times, the unearthing of thousands of unread x-rays, some of which detected cancer, I might add. A VA employee caught taking a drug rehab patient to a crack house and never disciplined until we publicly exposed it. The CAVIS director, James Talton, lying directly to me, a member of Congress, retaliation against whistleblowers, and finally, the termination of James Talton, the first termination in the nation of a director in the wake of the waitlist scandal that has swept the nation. I cannot overstate the malfeasance that took place during his tenure and the lasting harm that he inflicted on our veterans in Alabama. At the same time, his termination was well over a year ago. To this day, we still don't have a permanent director, and the hiring of other key staff has been extremely slow. While progress has been made, wait time, particularly for outside care, remain unacceptable. Given the challenges that we have faced in Alabama and the bureaucratic and cultural hurdles to turn around a troubled medical center, I've introduced this bill, the Failing VA Medical Center Recovery Act. Today, the VA lacks the organization, structure, and tools for swiftly addressing problems at the worst performing medical centers. Furthermore, there is little direct accountability at the very top for turning around an especially troubled medical center. This legislation focuses on the medical centers facing the most dysfunctional, being the most dysfunctional in the nation, ones that need major innovation and oversight at the highest levels of the VA. These 2 to 7 medical centers are determined by objective criteria, a composite score derived from the VA's own sale data, which measures key healthcare metrics. Similar to how a state school superintendent would take over the day-to-day operations of a failing school, this legislation requires the establishment of highly specialized teams to take over the day-to-day operations of the worst VA facilities in the nation, removing the medical centers from the failed local and regional VA leadership. Rapid deployment teams are empowered with enhanced legal authorities so they have the tools that they need to truly make a difference on day one. Legal authorities in this bill include direct hiring authority and the ability to pay up to 125% of the prevailing rate to address critical vacancies, enhanced personal accountability authority for termination and transfers, simplified contracting authority. Given the challenging nature of this assignment, members of the team are eligible for enhanced compensation and receive favorable consideration for promotion with a 2-year tour. The Office of Accountability and Review is required to prioritize whistleblower retaliation cases at failing medical centers, and the Inspector General is required to prioritize investigations related to failing medical centers. Upon sustained satisfactory performance for 9 months, measured by the sale data, these medical centers return to the operational control of local and regional leadership. The deployment teams are managed by the Office of Failing Medical Center Recovery. In the legislation today, this office is managed by a presidentially appointed undersecretary who has a direct line of access to the Secretary of the VA. However, I recently met with the Undersecretary of Health, Dr. Shulkin, and I have accepted his recommendation that this office fall under his direct control in VHA, and I'm open to modifying this legislation accordingly. I also welcome his personal commitment that these failing medical centers will receive his close supervision. There are some objections on behalf of the VA or comments to this legislation and some of the veterans organization. I'm happy to address those objections, but due to my rapidly decreasing amount of time, I will save that for any questions that you may have. What's clear here, though, Mr. Chairman, is that the status quo is not going to cut it. We have to do better on behalf of our veterans. And I understand any of your concerns, and I appreciate your feedback. I am willing to work with anyone who truly wants to improve the VA through this proposal and others. But let me tell you what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to wait for a broken bureaucracy to fix itself. So I would appreciate this committee's support on this piece of legislation. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Ms. Walorski, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Brownlee and members of the committee. I appreciate being given the opportunity to discuss H.R. 3471, the Veterans Mobility Safety Act of 2015. And first, I'd like to thank Chairman Benishek and Ranking Member Brownlee for your support of co-sponsoring this legislation. Automotive mobility plays a vital part in helping our disabled veterans live a normal life after being wounded on the battlefield. This legislation ensures these veterans receive the best adaptive equipment installation and service by requiring vendors who participate in the Department of Veteran Affairs, VA, Automotive Adaptive Equipment, or AAE, program to meet minimum certification or accreditation standards. The AAE program provides eligible disabled veterans with a new automobile or modification, such as wheelchair lifts, reduced effort steering and braking to existing vehicles in order to improve their quality of life. However, the VA does not require any type of certification or accreditation from vendors to install or sell these products. Since there are no requirements, VISNs operate based on their own interpretations of VA procedures, which has resulted in VISNs using inferior vendors in an attempt to reduce costs. The modifications we're talking about are highly complex products, which means a lack of quality and service requirements is putting the veteran and driving public at risk. 2 cases in my home state of Indiana illustrate this danger. In the first case, the VA had a company install an easy lock system into a veteran's vehicle. An easy lock system is a wheelchair docking system that secures a wheelchair to the vehicle floor. However, the bolt was improperly installed by the company and kept getting caught on things. The veteran complained to the VA, which sent him back to the dealer, whose solution was to cut off the bolt on the bottom of the chair in order to give him more room. However, doing so meant that the wheelchair could not lock into position, something the veteran didn't realize until his chair moved when a car cut him off and he slammed on his brakes. Thankfully, the veteran wasn't hurt, but it's an illustration of the needless danger caused by the lack of standards. In the other case, a dealer subcontracted an individual to come to a veteran's home to install a wheelchair lift. However, that individual never tested the lift. When the wheelchair was on the lift, it pushed the lift down, causing it to catch on and damage his bumper. The VA had another dealer take a look at the lift. Their solution removed the bumper. Finally, qualified professionals looked at the vehicle and concluded that the lift wasn't even compatible with the vehicle and should never have been installed in the first place. As a point of comparison, the VA currently requires a certification to sell a veteran a bottle of oxygen, while the AAE program uses an outdated handbook that was last updated in 2000. This inconsistency of procedures has put veterans' lives at risk and resulted in taxpayer dollars being wasted on shoddy or improperly installed equipment. My bill, H.R. 3471, ensures disabled veterans receive the best quality, performance, safety, and value by establishing a minimum set of standards for vendors who want to participate in the AAE program. Specifically, the vendors of adaptive equipment modification services must be certified by a certification organization or the manufacturer of the adaptive equipment and must adhere to the American with Disabilities Act of 1990 and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards. Individuals performing these modification services must also be certified by either a certification organization or a manufacturer or the state. Lastly, this legislation puts the veteran in charge of what equipment he gets by giving them the opportunity to make personal selections of their automobiles or adaptive equipment. Disabled veterans have given so much for our country, and they deserve the highest standard of mobility services. The robust, enforceable set of standards that are prescribed in H.R. 3471 will protect our veterans and the driving public while responsibly spending taxpayers' funds through the AAE program. I look forward to working with the members of this committee, veteran service organizations, and the VA in addressing this critical issue for disabled veterans. And I thank you again, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Brownlee, for this opportunity to speak today.
Thanks, Ms. Walorski. Mr. Klein was unable to make the hearing this morning. I'm not going to take time right now to ask any questions. Does anyone have any questions for the panel? Go ahead.
Just one brief question from Ms. Roby. One of the problems that we've seen in VA is the more centralized it gets, it doesn't get better. The Veterans Choice Program is a perfect example of one that we initiated, and the more you send upstream here to Washington, the worse it seems to get. I think the accountability needs to be from here down to make sure that was untenable what happened, and obviously a failure of leadership. But I'm not sure making it more bureaucratic and putting it up to people who were in charge that weren't successful to begin with is going to work. That's my true question. I understand exactly what you're saying. But we've just seen something that we intended and you intended when everybody in this room voted for the Veterans Choice Act. it didn't turn out like we thought it was going to, and I'm afraid they'll have the same result here. I think you just got to have accountability. We have people now who are in charge of those visits. They need to be fired if they're not doing the job, and then they need to have the director fired, and that's what needs to happen. So we need to look, instead of making it more bureaucratic, we need to hold people accountable, and that's what's been lacking at the VA is accountability.
Right, and so I would suggest to you, if you look closely at this bill, that it cuts through the layers of bureaucracy and does apply direct accountability to the Undersecretary of Health. These takeover teams, these rapid deployment teams come in and they are given the tools that are necessary to clean house if that's exactly what needs to happen. So they can assess the situation on the ground. What we're finding, I do a monthly call with my acting VISN 7 director and fill in, I meet with him when necessary between those calls as well because of the malfeasance and mismanagement. And what we found, James Talton, the director that was fired at Cavis, just because he was fired, we haven't seen an improvement in the culture, which shows that it doesn't lie at the feet of one person. Yes, Mr. Talton created a culture there, and he needed to be removed, but there are more bad actors, and they're all pointing fingers at one another, and they're able to hide behind these layers of bureaucracy that exist in the VA. So as I use the example of a failing school system, in the state of Alabama, and I suspect in some of your states as well, the school superintendent can come in and take over the day-to-day operations of a failing system. It's an embarrassment to everybody involved.
But a director can do that now. There's nothing.
Well, but what we're finding is that the directors are not being
And quite frankly,
removed.
we had the Undersecretary of Health last time that's now gone tell us that everything was hunky-dory at the VA. So I'm not sure, I think we remember that. And so anyway, I yield back. That was the questions I had.
Ms. Walorski.
And I think many of us involved in this committee have worked for years, long and hard, to take the horrific thing that happened to you and the kind of environment that you had to tolerate as a member of the armed services fighting for our nation. And we're working as hard as we can and as fast as we can to eradicate military sexual assault from this military. And I just wanted to thank you for what you do and let you know that we are behind you, and we're working every day to make sure that we together are going to be able to say that we eradicated this and that it's a safe place to serve. So I'm so sorry for what you've had to endure, but your bravery coming here today does make a difference, and we are taking steps forward, and you helped make that happen. So thank you.
Thank you. My hope is that it will help the veterans that are coming home from the long bouts of war that we've been in so that they can get better care than I have.
They absolutely will. Thanks for your bravery.
Ms. Custer, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. I just want to add to thanking you. This is a bipartisan issue that we've worked very closely on and will continue to, and I appreciate you coming forward. My question for Mr. Barr, and this is just more of a conundrum that we have on this committee, is if we use the option of outside care, which makes a great deal of sense to me. I'm in a rural area. There are times when you can't see the providers you need. Will we run the risk of this issue not being taken seriously and being front and center going forward within the VA? That's my concern. I'm afraid that if we turn our attention away, this is something Ms. Walorski and I have been working on. We have a large group of people. We've passed some pieces of legislation. I hesitate to let the VA off the hook, and that's my question.
I appreciate my friend and the gentlelady's question, and what I have found and discovered is that the simple introduction of this legislation that would empower victims and empower survivors of MST to choose their own care, to find that specialized care that they need, actually is the feature, the reform feature that holds the VA accountable and actually gets the VA to do those things and we've seen it in our own VA right in central Kentucky. The fact that we introduced this legislation has resulted in response from the VA in terms of some hiring decisions and some reforms internally that have offered new veterans those services that they need within the VA. But regardless of those reforms and those improvements that we've seen, we still see a need for that immediate choice to ultimately give the veteran the power over his or her care. And so they can decide, the therapist, the psychologist, the care provider, that they deem to be most suitable for their particular situation.
Great, thank you very much, and I'll look into working with you on that, and I appreciate it. And then I just wanted to thank Mr. Bilirakis for his bill. We have an opioid crisis in New Hampshire. I started a bipartisan task force that I encourage folks to join. Mr. Kaufman has been so kind as to schedule a hearing coming up in December in New Hampshire. And on this opioid issue within the VA, we have some folks working in pain management that are doing some cutting-edge work that I'm very excited to share through this hearing, bringing down the prescriptions of opioids and using other methods of pain management. And so I just wanted to thank Mr. Bilirakis. I'm going to be an original co-sponsor of his bill and look forward to working in a bipartisan way on this issue. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Well, if there's no further questions, the first panel is excused. Thank you. I'd like to welcome the second panel to the witness table. Joining us on the second panel is Adrian Adesado, the Deputy National Legislative Director for the Disabled American Veterans. LaRonda Holt, the Assistant Director for Women and Minority Veterans Outreach for the National Veterans Affairs and Rehabilitation Division of the American Legion. And Carlos Fuentes, the Senior Legislative Associate for the National Legislative Service of the Veterans of Foreign Wars of the United States. Thank you all for being here and for your hard work and advocacy on behalf of our veterans. So I look forward to hearing the views of your members. And let's see, Mr. Adesado, you may begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. First, I'd like to thank you for inviting DAV to testify at this legislative hearing. As you know, our organization is nearly 1.3 million members. They're wartime service-disabled veterans. As an organization, we are dedicated to a single purpose, and that's to empower veterans to lead high-quality lives with respect and dignity. So DAV is pleased to be here today to present our views on the bills under consideration by the subcommittee. So for the sake of brevity, I will limit my remarks to 3 of these bills. First is H.R. 3549, the VA Billing Accountability Act. As was mentioned earlier, this bill would provide VA the authority to waive a required copayment if the veteran received a VA notification more than 120 days from the date of VA service, or more than 18 months after the date of non-VA facility service, and that the notification was delayed due to the agency's error. Under the bill, VA would also need to provide information to veterans on arranging payment plans and applying for waivers. We support this legislation. We have a resolution passed by our membership regarding co-payments and ask for swift action on this bill. With regards to the draft bill, the Promise Act, DAV supports this bill based on a number of resolutions adopted by our membership at our most recent national convention. While VA has made recent efforts to address overprescribing, its existing pain management program appears to be not well organized. It is also insufficiently staffed. We believe enactment of this bill would call attention to the need for VA to better manage and staff this function at both the national and local levels. DAV also believes this bill is a good first step toward improving the patient advocacy program to help veterans and family caregivers better navigate the VA healthcare system. We support the advent of complementary and alternative care and substitute of VA's use of pharmacological agents, and to better respond to the preferences of younger, mostly younger, but some aging veterans as well, who often do not want traditional medical management, especially if it involves prescribing of pain or psychotropic medications. We appreciate the sponsors introducing this omnibus proposal, and we urge Congress to proceed with its enactment this year. Now, the last measure I'd like to discuss is VA's legislative proposal, which would give the agency the authority to enter into agreements for purchasing medical care from community providers. Now, according to VA, this proposal will streamline and speed the business process for purchasing care for an individual veteran when necessary care cannot be purchased through existing mechanisms, such as contracts or sharing agreements. We support the intent of this draft legislation based on DAV Resolution 217. However, we do recommend this measure be amended to add certain federally recognized providers of service with whom VA would be able to enter into an agreement with under the measure. These providers have served over 3,400 severely ill and injured veterans of all ages across 31 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. Under this program, veterans are given the opportunity to determine their own supports and services. They themselves control it. This allows them to live independently in the community and stave off having to go into a nursing home. However, as with other community providers affected by the current situation, their arrangement with VA remains uncertain. This critical program's growth to become available at every VA medical center has been stymied for lack of VA's authority that would be provided under this measure. We urge this subcommittee pass this measure to relieve the current unsustainable and untenable situation that is adversely affecting the lives of ill and injured veterans and their families. This concludes my testimony, Mr. Chairman. I'd be happy to answer any questions you or other subcommittee members may have.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Ms. Holt, you may begin your statement.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Benesek, Ranking Member Brownlee, and members of the committee. I am privileged to be here today and to speak on behalf of the American Legion, our National Commander, Dale Barnett, and more than 2 million members in over 14,000 posts across the country that make up the backbone of the nation's largest wartime veteran service organization. There are several good bills for discussion today. And your full remarks are with you. I would like to focus on one key bill. H.R. 1603, Military Sexual Assault Victim Empowerment Act, or the Military Saved Act. This bill would enable the Veterans Access, Choice, and Accountability Act of 2014, which is to improve the private treatment of veterans who are victims of military sexual trauma. This bill would make victims of military sexual trauma potentially eligible for non-VA health care under the Veterans Choice Program. Ultimately, this is about trying to find the right treatments and therapies for every veteran. And in the case of MST, unique circumstances can shape treatment and therapy needs. VA should be flexible to ensure these veterans receive the appropriate care they need in an environment that is conducive to the veteran's unique circumstances. MST, if left untreated for veterans, is a nexus to other mental health conditions such as PTSD, depression, substance abuse, and suicidal ideations. In the case of these survivors, ensuring they get the appropriate time and therapy can mean the difference between a survivor continuing their treatment, abandoning treatment, and feeling further isolated and possibly escalations in their symptoms. The American Legion is deeply concerned with the challenges survivors of MST face and is urging Congress to ensure MST survivors can receive the right health care at the right place and at the right time. In January of 2011, the American Legion launched a landmark women veterans survey which identified challenges women veterans face when receiving gender-specific health care for treatment of MST conditions throughout the VA healthcare facilities. The American Legion has since fought for better awareness training in the VA for MST sensitivity, significant increases in outreach, and to provide more comprehensive care options for MST survivors to include female therapists, group therapists, and other options for care for MST accessibility to include care in their community. As noted in our written testimony, VA is working to improve their MST programs. However, as we know, changes within the VA can take time, and even the best programs can have different results from one VA to another. The veterans should not have to suffer because the health care they need is not available in their local health care facility. The American Legion recognizes that the Choice Program was an emergency measure to make health care accessible to veterans where VA was struggling to deliver such care. In recognition of the needs of an integrated system to deliver non-VA health care when needed, the American Legion believes VA needs to develop a well-defined and consistent non-VA coordinated program, policies, procedures that include a patient-centered care strategy which takes veterans' unique medical injuries and illnesses, as well as their travel and distance into consideration. For survivors of MST who are suffering right now, the American Legion believes they should have immediate access to prompt medical treatment, either within the VA healthcare system or in their local community. As with an outside VA, the American Legion stresses the importance of ensuring non-VA healthcare has quality of care standards equal to or better than VA quality care standards. Additionally, the care MST survivors receive must be coordinated effectively and efficiently to ensure veteran health care is not adversely impacted. Most importantly, non-VA healthcare providers must have access to VA healthcare records and to the full extent possible make use of the electronic data information exchange to ensure patient health information. Again, I thank the committee for their hard work and consideration for this legislation, as well as your dedication to finding solutions for problems that stand in the way of delivery of veterans' health care. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Holt. Mr. Fuentes, please begin.
Chairman Benishek, Ranking Member Brownlee, and members of the committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to present the views of the men and women of the VFW and our auxiliaries. So I thank you for the opportunity and believe that the bills that we are discussing today are aimed at improving the health care VA provides our nation's veterans, and I thank you for bringing them forward. I would limit my remarks to bills we support and have recommendations to improve. The VFW supports the Ask Veterans Act, which will survey veterans to evaluate their views and experiences seeking VA health care. When the VA access crisis erupted in April 2014, the VFW turned to our members to gauge their experiences and evaluate the access issues from their perspectives. The information we obtained through surveys was invaluable and helped us shape our healthcare policy agenda and develop recommendations to improve the VA healthcare system. Currently, VA conducts a number of surveys to measure veterans' experiences and evaluate its progress in meeting strategic goals. However, frequent surveys only sample veterans who have recently used VA healthcare, and surveys that sample all veterans are not frequent enough. That is why we urge the committee to require the legislation survey to include a sample of all veterans, not just recent VA patients. The VFW supports the Wounded Warrior Workforce Enhancement Act, which would expand availability of orthotic and prosthetic care. Orthotists and prosthetists are vital to ensuring VA provides the prosthetic care and services veterans have earned and deserve. For this reason, we urge the committee to amend this legislation by adding a requirement that grant recipients offer reduced or no-cost education to students who enter into a service agreement with VA, similar to service agreements under other VA health professionals education assistance programs. The VFW also supports the VA Billing Accountability Act, which would ensure veterans are promptly notified of their co-payment obligations and would require VA to waive co-payments if it fails to properly notify veterans. Earlier this year, more than 1,400 veterans were charged more than $500,000 for 5 years' worth of health care received at the Minneapolis VA Medical Center. While disheartening, VA charging veterans for years of co-payments is not rare. The VFW continues to hear from veterans that VA has sent them large bills for care they either had no idea they were liable for or were unaware they had not paid. This legislation ensures veterans are not punished for VA's inability to get its house in order. However, the VFW recommends that the subcommittee allow VA to evaluate whether the 120-day and 18-month requirements for notifying veterans of co-payment obligations are aligned with industry best practices. The VFW also supports the Promise Act, which would reduce VA's reliance on pharmacotherapy to treat mental health and complex pain conditions, expand VA research, education, and delivery of complementary and alternative medicine, and improve VA internal audits. Countless veterans have experienced firsthand the dangerous side effects of pharmacotherapy. High-dose pain medications, if incorrectly prescribed, have been proven to render veterans incapable of interacting with their loved ones and even contemplate suicide. This legislation would reform the way VA treats complex pain conditions to ensure VA medical facilities comply with VA's critical practice guidelines for pain management. The VFW has consistently heard from veterans that their patient advocates are ineffective or seek to protect the medical facility's leadership instead of addressing their concerns. For this reason, we strongly recommend that the subcommittee amend this legislation to codify the VA's Veterans Experience Office, established to collect and disseminate best practices for improving customer service, coordinate community outreach efforts, and serve as the subject matter experts on the benefits and services VA provides veterans. The Veterans Experience Officers should replace patient advocates currently located at VA medical facilities. That requires that the duties of Veterans Experience Officers be amended to include ensuring protections under Title 38 are fully applied and complied with by VA medical facilities and contracted community care providers. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my remarks, and I'm ready to answer any questions you and your members of the subcommittee may have. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Fuentes. Appreciate all of your comments. They're very helpful. I yield myself 5 minutes for a few questions that I have, and I guess really what I want to talk about a little bit is the VA is going to talk about their VA purchased healthcare streamlining and modernization proposal, and I'd like to talk to you about that a little bit before they actually testify, and I get to ask them questions about it because, we passed this Choice Act last year, which we thought would make it easier for veterans to get care in the private sector. And basically, the implementation of that was left to the VA, and they decided we can't do it. We're going to get these third-party providers to do it, and it's going to be so much easier for veterans to get care in the local community, and yet that really hasn't worked. As far as I can tell, it's been a difficult implementation. So now they want to have a unified plan to getting care in the community. Instead of different programs, have one community outreach plan so that it's uniform and easier for everybody. So I was hoping to ask you all if you had any ideas as the best way to do that, because we left it to the VA. They came up with a plan that hasn't been that good. So with that thought in mind, Mr. Adesato, what do you think of a way to improve patients' access to community care? Do you have any ideas in that regard, or what has your group been thinking about?
Well, I guess I'll tackle that question from two fronts. With regards to this bill that VA has proposed, my understanding is, and I'm sure VA will mention this as well, provider agreements are a staple when purchasing care in the communities, at least for VA's side of the house. They've used this type of arrangement rather than a more cumbersome contract vehicle, which is what the choice program actually requires as a vehicle for a contract as a vehicle to establish the business arrangements. With a contract, there are a lot more requirements that some smaller service providers may find not appealing to enter in with VA. They just, the volume just would not make any business sense for them to enter into that kind of an agreement, hence a provider agreement. But with respect to the choice program, you know, this was a pretty rapid response to a burgeoning issue, a crisis. And as we've noticed, Congress has acted to change the choice program at least a couple of times, because once it was implemented, we realized, everybody realized, that there were problems with operationalizing this concept. So with regards to your central question about how are we going to be able, what do we have to do to get VA to be able to purchase care in the community the way we would like? Well, I can tell you as a patient and as members of our organization have requested, there are 4 main areas that need to be addressed. I don't want to take up all your time, but I can certainly send you a written response to that.
Well, I appreciate that. You know, I've been a provider at the VA myself, and I understand lots of those things that you mentioned here. I just thought I would try to reach out, because this is a problem that we tried to solve, improving care, but we just haven't got the VA to do it right, and we just hoping to get continued input as we struggle to find a way to get community care for our veterans in a timely fashion. And well, I would welcome input from all your groups as we work toward that struggle here and now. So, Mr. Fuentes, you quickly,
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I just wanted to kind of follow up on what my colleague said here, and also say that the choice program, although it's made a lot of progress, was intended to be essentially a pilot program to see what works and what doesn't. Through our surveys, working with VA and working with the contractors, we've been able to identify a lot of issues, right? And I think you've all seen it through your constituencies. And really, the next step really is to reform the delivery model, right? And take the lessons learned and really take a holistic approach to delivering healthcare to veterans that incorporates the best qualities and capabilities of the private sector and VA and other public healthcare providers, right? And making that analysis at the local level to see what VA is able to provide, what the demand is, and I think that's what's been lacking for a long period of time, is having that demand capacity analysis to really take a look at what the demand is and who can provide that care, who's best to provide that care, what's most quality and also accessible. So, and you know, happy to follow up, and we're looking forward to the hearing tomorrow to discuss the plan, and we're hoping to maybe comment on some of VA's plan in more detail, more official manner.
Right. Ms. Brownlee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask quickly about the Mr. O'Rourke's bill, the Ask Veterans Act. And I know that the DAV and the American Legion both either don't have a position or agree, I guess, with the VA that it's duplicative. And, you know, I just wanted to hear why you think that. From my perspective, it's not, because of the surveying that the VA is doing now. It's sort of comprehensive, it's sort of national. It doesn't, I don't think, we haven't really been able to trust the data, and it doesn't drill down, I think, deep enough to get the data that we really need on a regional basis to understand what some of those issues are. So I'm just curious to hear from both of you about.
Yes, the American Legion, as you mentioned, we do not have a position at this time for that, and it is because they do have the sub process in place. Now, what we can do, we can take that into consideration and maybe bring that back to our members, because we don't want to do anything without our over 2 million members, agreeing, and we really want to know what it is that their needs are. So I think we just need to do further research on that, and we can get back with you and provide you a more written, conducive statement to provide for you on that topic. Mm-hmm.
Ms. Brownlee, I appreciate you having read our testimony. That our positions on legislation really come from mandates from our membership. Since we don't have one specifically on surveys, taking a position on Mr. O'Rourke's bill would just, it would not be the place based on our Constitution bylaw. But having said that, we understand Mr. O'Rourke's situation. We hear it every day. I hear it every day. I see the numbers that VA puts out, and I hear those thousands. There are literally thousands of veterans, or I should say, as VA measures them, appointments that are well outside what we would think to be timely. Now, the concern that we have with surveying members or surveying patients is that what happens after that? Our testimony talks about getting all this information and what happens after. What is the action to be taken? So our recommendation with the bill is, if this subcommittee passes this bill in its form, notwithstanding what VA has been trying to do recently, I think they came out with a couple of additional surveys that looks at more specific points of service within a hospital, as well as outside in the community. But what action will be taken after that? I've looked at the numbers for El Paso, Mr. O'Rourke, and I can tell you the wait times are higher than average. We're talking thousands of veterans, not only in completed appointments, but waiting to have scheduled over 30 days. There are certain areas of the country that are just far worse off than others. And as any medical center director, any facility director can tell you, it's far more complicated than surveys. But that is a key question to ask. I think one of the prevailing themes that we've come across throughout this discussion about access to care is, where is the patient's voice in all of this? Where does VA put veterans when they develop their initiatives or their policies? Where's the patients in that? Oftentimes we are consulted. They take our ideas into consideration, but being part of the development, I think, would be key. It would go a long way.
Thank you. I wanted to ask quickly another question on the military sexual assault. So, Mr. Fuentes, I understand that VFW is opposing the bill. They feel as though MST is better treated within the VA, generally, roughly. So, if you could respond to that. And what I'm really curious to know for all three organizations on something like military sexual assault, how do you survey your membership? Is it a broad brush survey that everybody responds to, or are you surveying just, well, not necessarily, it's not always women. Sometimes men are assaulted too. But, how do you get that information from your organization?
And just to clarify, we don't believe that MST is best delivered at VA at all times, right? I think our opposition is that the choice program, as I said, is going to end soon, and really what you need to do is take a look at how to solve the access issue as a whole, and I think MST is also included in there, and how to ultimately, our belief is that VA is accountable for the care that's provided to veterans, regardless if it's a non-VA care provider or VA. It's providing that holistic approach to medicine that's made VA one of the best providers in the world, actually. Now,
my time is running out, so I think we're going to have to follow up.
Yes, I can follow up with that.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I yield back.
Dr. Rowe, you're recognized.
Thank you, Dr. Benishek. Just a couple of things that seem simple to me. One is, what is the purpose of the VA? It's to provide health care for veterans. Real simple. I have literally made thousands of appointments, medical appointments, to see other specialists. The VA is one of the only organizations in the world can make that complicated. It is really simple to do. Patient comes in and sees Dr. Rowe. They need to see a dermatologist. I know who the dermatologists are in my community who are quality. I write it, it goes out front, I send them a note either electronically or by, oh, heaven forbid, somebody types it. They make an appointment, they go see the dermatologist, and I get information back. That happens millions of times, but only the VA can take something as simple as an appointment and send it out front to Washington, to a third party, to my Lord. It'd make your head. You could send up the space shuttle easier than getting an appointment. And so I think we've got to back up and empower veterans. And I think veterans are going to be able to vote with their feet. I think if they feel like they get the best care somewhere else, they should be getting that care wherever they can get the best care. I am so frustrated with this because it should not be that hard, I can tell you, having done it for 30-plus years, to get a patient an appointment. We know if you can't get a cardiology appointment, you recruit cardiologists. We know that if you can't get primary care, I'm not saying it's easy, but you know what those things are, and this is not difficult to do. Dr. Benishek has done it, and Dr. Abraham has done it. Others of us, and Dr. Reeves, who's not here now, has done the same thing. We know how to get those appointments, and we know there are places like in treating PTSD, there's a shortage of providers. We know that. So we need to concentrate on providing those resources for people. But I just share my frustration with how the VA has gotten so bogged down about it being about the VA and not about the patient. It ought to be about the veteran and how to quickly, the best way to get that veteran care. Look, if it's to do with a loss of a limb, probably some of the best in the world is at certainly Walter Reed. I've been there many times and looked at that, translated down to the VA. For others, it may be something else. It may be out in the non-VA care. It should be about getting the quality, quick care for the veteran. We ought to be not making the bureaucracy bigger and harder to do. But anyway, I just want to make those statements, and certainly I disagree, and you cleared it up, Mr. Fuentes, that military sexual trauma may be best treated outside the VA. For that particular, it should be where it's best. As this young woman provided her testimony, what's best for her? Shouldn't be about the VA, it should be about where's the best care.
And if I may, Dr. Rowe, I think completely agree in terms of, it needs to be where it's best. Ultimately, what I think has been lost in a lot of this conversation is that first and foremost, it needs to be high quality care. And accessible is also a part of that. And I think it's secondary to quality, however. But when it comes to reform ideas, we are strongly opposed to just simply giving a veteran a card and going out to the community and fending for themselves. That's because if you do that, what you're doing is underfunding VA and then giving them an option or putting them out there in the private sector that's not prepared or doesn't have the actual capacity in all aspects in every state and every place.
Friends, I disagree with you on that, and we'll just respectfully disagree. Look, I was prepared to see veterans. I'm a veteran. I was prepared to see veterans, although I didn't work at the VA. I could clearly see those patients. That's what I did for a living. Took great care of people, but put the quality up with anybody. I think you're going to have the VA compete for those patients to keep them in there and not trap them in there. When you can't get, I had an old GP tell me one time, they're the 3 A's of practicing medicine before I started my practice. It's accessibility, affability, and ability. People got to like you. They got to be able to get to you. If you can't get there, the quality doesn't count if you can't get an appointment. And just because the VA practices medicine doesn't mean that quality doesn't exist, because it does outside the VA, and yet we're making it hard when the patients, the veteran, can't get in to get the care in the VA. We're making it almost impossible to get the care outside the VA, and we're going to hear more about that tomorrow.
And if I may, Dr. O, I completely agree with you that VA is not the best every single place, right? What needs to happen is analyze who has the best care in what market and determine where that veteran needs to go to receive high-quality, accessible
then
care.
timely
And most of the times, we think it will be VA, but in plenty of times, and a lot of times, depending on MST, depending on what the service is, it could be in the private sector, because there are providers, such as yourself, in the private sector who are ready and able to care for veterans, and we need to empower them to be able to do so as well.
I yield back.
Thanks. Mr. O'Rourke, you recognized. Good. Mr. Takano?
Ms. Custer doesn't have a question.
Oh, okay.
I just have one question. Regarding the failing VA Recovery, Medical Center Recovery Act, do you think a new office is necessary to oversee whether a VA medical facility is doing its job of treating veterans? And what are your concerns regarding medical treatment of veterans should this new office be created? And it's generally to whoever wants to answer the question.
I'll step in. Thank you for the question, Congressman Takano. We, as you probably surmised from our testimony, we don't have a resolution to support the bill, but we have a number of concerns on the bill. I think one, first and foremost, is creating a new bureaucracy within the VA healthcare system where the responsibilities for that one new office really rests with those parts within VA that have the expertise that deal with that domain. A healthcare hospital is a very complex institution. And I understand that that the bill wants to centralize all those under one office, but I hesitate to consider what would happen if you were to create that, and what happens to the other parts of VA whose responsibility is right now to make sure that hospitals that need help or underperforming are actually incentivized to raise up to the standard that VA expects its facilities to be. But having said that, there's one part of the bill that I want to make sure this committee is aware of, and I'm thinking you already are, and it's this dearth of leadership. There seems to be an environment right now within the VA healthcare system that people who would otherwise step forward to take leadership positions in the VA just are not. I can't explain to you why that isn't. VA's had statements before about how many are acting, how many are vacant, not only in the facilities at the local level, but also at central office, who we need to make sure that there's a minimum standard that every facility must meet, whether it's MST or access, whether it's recruiting appropriately or having a center of excellence. That I couldn't tell you right now how to possibly address that situation, but it is hurting facilities, which means it's hurting VA employees, which means it's hurting veterans.
And on behalf of the American Legion, the reason why at this moment or this time that we're not supporting this is because we feel that we don't need to establish another bureaucracy to monitor and track the VA facilities for poor performance. We believe that that responsibility should lie solely under the Undersecretary for Health. Now, should Congress, make amendments to this, we can bring that back to our members, and we will be more than happy to provide a statement, in a later time, if that's okay with you.
Congressman, we agree with the intent of identifying facilities that need assistance. However, what we believe is necessary is a compliance mechanism, right? And our opinion is that the patient advocacy program is supposed to be that compliance mechanism to ensure that veterans are receiving the care that they have earned and deserved. However, due to the fact that they are under the chain of command of their local medical facility leadership, it prevents them from really being that advocate for veterans. And we feel that if you strengthen that program, and like we said, like we recommend codifying the Veterans Experience Office and having that be a part of the chain of command, separate from the chain of command, will enable VA to really implement that compliance mechanism that's necessary.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thanks, Mr. Takano. Mr. Kaufman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a member of both the American Legion and the VFW, thank you for being here today, and certainly in talking about military sexual trauma, I really appreciate the position of the American Legion. I think that those victims of military sexual trauma ought to be able to choose the best treatment options available in their specific case, rather than having it dictated to them. And I would expand that to all mental health care, because the biggest cost driver I think that we're confronting in disability care, in disability, is post-traumatic stress disorder or mental health. And so I think it's a very personal thing, that interaction between a therapist and a patient. And I really think that individuals ought to be able to select what is best for them. And I'm disappointed with the VA in terms of having a drug-centric approach in terms of a modality of treatment. And I think we've had testimony to the effect in this committee where, in fact, we've related suicides to, say, I think we had one instance here where a veteran had moved and was given a cocktail of psychoactive drugs to counter symptoms of PSD, and then moved and couldn't navigate the system for a refill. And that's a fairly dramatic thing to happen when somebody's suddenly off of these drugs. And at the end, they're given a drug to wake up in the morning, and a drug to go to sleep at night, and a drug for this and a drug for that. In my view, that's not a good therapy. But I understand that it's probably from the VA's point of view, it's more cost effective to do that than the laborious sort of treatment where psychotherapy is given as an exchange between two individuals, the therapist and the patient. And so I think the more options, and who better, if a patient is feeling better as a result of a certain modality of treatment that they're going through, whatever that modality of treatment is, I just think it ought to be available. And again, I think it's a very personal, interpersonal thing. And so I would ask for the VFW to go back and take a second look at this issue, because I just think it's so important for individuals to have options and to make it their decision when it comes to something so interpersonal as therapy for MST, for military sexual trauma, or for post-traumatic stress disorder.
Carlos.
Sure.
If I may, Congressman, we completely agree that veterans need to be presented with options, but I think high quality and accessible options. And ultimately what it comes down to is providing them the ability to go to providers that, one, knows how to care for veterans, right? But also knows the other aspects of and comorbidities that are associated with mental health conditions, right? But ultimately, what it comes down to is reforming the VA culture and the delivery care model. One of the things that's most frustrating about VA is that we often find, as a patient, also find that a lot of VA employees are quick to justify why they can say no instead of getting to yes. Right, that's something that needs to change. But also the delivery care model to be able to provide them those options instead of just sending them off to the private sector to fend for themselves.
Let me tell you, I don't think our veterans that have returned from war can wait for the VA to reform itself. There was one Iraq War veteran in my congressional district who committed suicide. The only thing, what we were able to trace was the fact that he called VA for an appointment and hadn't received a response for 2 weeks before his death. And so I can tell you, as an Army Marine Corps veteran, our veterans deserve better, and they can't wait for this system to improve. They have to have choices, and they deserve to have those choices now. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thanks, Mr. Kaufman. Mr. Kind?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to, first of all, thank you and Ranking Member Brownlee and all the members of the committee for the courtesy for me to be on the dais. I'm not a normal member of the Veterans Committee, but I do appreciate the oversight, the work, the attention, the concern that you've shown with many of the challenges that we face within the VA system itself, but the VA medical centers. I'm here specifically in regards to legislation that Mr. Adesato and the DAV has endorsed, the Jason Simkakowski Promise Act. Been working very closely with Chairman Bilirakis as well as Representative Rice of this committee to introduce that bill this week. And Mr. Kaufman, I couldn't agree with you more. I think we've got a major opioid problem within the VA system, but not limited to the VA system. I think it's healthcare system-wide that's going to require a lot more care and focus and attention by this Congress in order to make the changes that are necessary. And that's exactly what the Promise Act was meant to do. It's named after a constituent of mine, Jason Simkakowski, who lost his life under the care and the treatment of the VA Medical Center in the center of my congressional district in Tomah, Wisconsin. And I've been working very closely with his wife and his father, Heather and Marvin Simkakowski, to get the story out. But that family has one concern on their mind, and that is to work with this Congress, to work with the VA, to make sure that the tragedy that befell their loved one doesn't happen again. And that's the whole intent behind the Promise Act. We have companion legislation already in the Senate on this, and again, with Chairman Bilirakis' leadership, we're hoping to be able to introduce something, and we appreciate the DAV's level of input and support that you've given this legislation. In a moment, I'm going to ask you whether the DAV, in looking at the legislation, has any further recommendations in working with us in what you would make. There's one aspect of it I've been especially focused on. It's based on legislation I've introduced earlier called the Veterans Pain Management Improvement Act that I've introduced with Mr. Zeldin and Mr. Ribble, which has established pain management boards. It comes out of the recommendations that the OIG has made on a nationwide survey within the VA system, but also the particular investigations that came out of Tomah in light of what took place there. And what it does do is it changes the delivery of care model, the culture, but probably most importantly, it gives patients and the family members themselves a greater say and a greater input in regards to the treatment regimen. I am convinced that the family members are the first line of defense when it comes to our veterans. They're going to know what's working and what's not working, and we have to make it easier for them to provide that input in regards to the care and the treatment that the loved one, the veteran, and their family is receiving. And unfortunately, we haven't seen that in many instances. That Pain Management Board Act is included in the Senate version. We're still working on whether or not it makes sense or what type of changes have to be made in regards to the Promise Act when we introduce it to this week. But Mr. Adesato, if you have anything you want to share in regards to the DAV's insight on this matter, it would be appreciated.
Congressman Kind, thank you for your kind words, your effort in this area. This is a very sensitive issue. Most of our members, if not all, are severely injured with some kind of chronic pain. It's prevalent in our membership. Our members are feel very strongly about pain management in the VA. Yes, they're worried, as Mr. Kaufman had mentioned, about overprescribing, but there's also a growing voice that's worried that they're being underprescribed. And if they are in fact being underprescribed, they're trying to seek relief with alternative types of care, which, while they would like to receive, are having a hard time trying to get for a number of reasons. I would love to work with you and your staff on that.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that aspect because it's so important. There are so many more alternative and complementary forms of care that we ought to be exploring in much greater detail rather than just loading them up on a cocktail of drugs all the time. And I've been aghast with the number of veterans and families who have come into my congressional office with literally grocery bags full of prescription drugs that they're getting from the VA system. And they can't, in their lifetime, take all of that, yet it keeps being sent to them almost on a weekly basis, and they're overwhelmed with it. So I think we have to be a little bit more creative. And one other piece of legislation, if you may, Mr. Chairman, is I've introduced the Veterans Access to Care Act to try to deal with the access and the waiting line issue that we have out there. And what this does is it expands the definition of health professional shortage areas for qualified VA medical centers around the country. It's loan forgiveness, it's scholarships, it's other incentives in order to get the highly qualified and trained healthcare professionals in the VA system in order to address the shortages. And I know, speaking to Tomah, I mean, they got a critical shortage of primary care, nurse practitioners. They can't find a dermatologist. I mean, all that has to be farmed out if they're lucky enough to do that. But we're seeing this across the board, these shortage areas and that. And this legislation that I've introduced with my colleague, Mr. Ribble, might be a part of the answer of creating further incentives to get the trained professionals in where we need them the most. But I thank you again for your courtesy, allowing me to participate here today for this important hearing. I yield back.
Well, thanks for being here. I appreciate it. Are there any other questions? If not, then the panel is excused. Thank you very much for being here. Very much appreciate your input. I'd like to now welcome our third and final panel to the witness table. Joining us from the Department of Veteran Affairs is Janet Murphy, the Acting Deputy Undersecretary for Health for Operations and Management. She is joined by Elias Hernandez, the Chief Officer of Workforce Management and Consulting, Harold Cudler, the Chief Consultant for Mental Health Services, and Susan Blart, the Deputy Assistant General Counsel. Thank you for being here. Ms. Murphy, you may begin when you're ready. Thanks.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Brownlee. Thank you for inviting me here today to present our views on several bills that would affect the Department of Veterans Affairs. Joining me today is Dr. Harold Cudler, Chief Mental Health Consultant, Elias Hernandez, Chief Officer, Workforce Management and Consulting, and Susan Blewart, Attorney in the Office of General Counsel. First, let me begin by thanking the committee for including the VA legislative proposal to establish certain agreements for purchasing medical care for veterans when care within VA facilities or through contracts or sharing agreements is not feasibly available. As many of you know, this is VA's top legislative priority, and we certainly appreciate the full committee's support and passage of this bill. H.R. 1319 would require VA to enter into a contract to conduct annual surveys of veterans at each facility. However, VHA is already conducting ongoing surveys of over 1 million veterans annually through our Survey of Health Experiences of a Patient per our SHEP program. VA used a scientifically designed survey instrument, the Consumer Assessment of Health Providers and Systems, in developing our SHEP survey, which allows us to compare our performance with non-VA hospitals and healthcare systems. H.R. 1603 would allow veterans seeking care for military sexual trauma to elect to use the Veterans Choice Program and waive choice eligibility requirements. While VA fully supports veterans seeking care for MST where they choose in the community, if they choose, we are currently able to offer that option through choice at this time, and the new changes that Congress has made to the Choice Act make that even more available for those veterans. Would also say that VA providers have received evidence-based training and education about MST-related issues, which may not be commonly found in the community. H.R. 1904 calls for enhancing existing prosthetic orthotic graduate programs, as well as developing a prosthetic orthotic research center of excellence. VA currently operates 5 research centers of excellence, which incorporate our interns and residents, as well as graduate students from affiliated academic institutions. VA does not support revising the VA marriage and family therapy qualification standards as proposed by H.R. 2639. VA's current qualification standards for all mental health professionals require an individual to have graduated from a program accredited by an approved accrediting body that also certifies the training program within that specific discipline. With H.R. 3234, we recognize the intent of the bill is to improve performance. VA already conducts many of the activities and requirements outlined in the bill. We utilize strategic analytics, improvement and learning, or SAIL data to measure, evaluate, and benchmark quality and efficiency at VAMCs. Based on SAIL, VA also sends teams of subject matter experts to local facilities to provide consultative training and to help facilities and provide follow-up consultation. We continuously monitor facility performance and provide additional resources as necessary. VA is extremely concerned with establishing a new undersecretary position to manage and lead this office, as it removes authority currently vested in the Undersecretary for Health. We believe such an organization would be costly and duplicative and would not be successful in achieving improved outcomes in care. With H.R. 3471, VA does not believe this bill is necessary. VA does not manufacture nor install adoptive equipment on a beneficiary's vehicle. Instead, VA's role is to prescribe and pay for adoptive equipment. All safety and compliance issues are addressed by the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration. VA supports the intent of 3549 to provide the authority to the Secretary to waive copayment bills generated in error to prevent undue burden to veterans. However, VA wants to ensure that any statutory changes do not remove authority to generate copayment bills that are rightfully owed, but are delayed due to normal business processes. VA estimates a 10-year revenue loss of about $700 million if copayments are waived after 120 days from the date of service. We do not have cleared views or costs for Section 103, Title III, and Section 501 of the Promise discussion draft. However, we would be glad to provide these views at a later time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for the opportunity to testify before you today. My colleagues and I would be pleased to respond to any questions that you may have.
Thanks for your testimony, Ms. Murphy. I really appreciate it. How do you explain the difference in the results of Mr. O'Rourke's survey and the VA survey? I mean, that's basically the reason here is that, you know, we've sort of come to not trust the VA and their results. So when you say that you're doing them in a scientific fashion, you know, that's all well and good, but you're opposed to a third party doing it? I don't get that.
Yeah. So currently, we do have a third party that does our survey. So it's directly between the third party under contract, directly with the veterans, and we are simply given the results. So there's no interaction with that survey between us and the veterans. It's the contractor does it all. But I would just say that our results actually are the same as the congressman's results. The veterans aren't very happy. And so, you know, our results actually align. I think also in measuring access, what we really want to know is what the veterans think, which is what the congressman's survey tells us, and which is what our survey tells us too. And so in many ways, they're very aligned. And I guess what I would really welcome is the opportunity to sit down with the congressman and see where we could, where he feels we have deficits in our process and where we could align our process more with what he has in mind. We're always looking for input. The VSOs and veterans have input on our current survey. In 2016, we're actually going to expand it to be able to drill down more to certain specialties, particularly high volume specialties in mental health and other areas. So, you know, we're constantly improving it, and, you know, I would welcome having a conversation with the congressman or his staff on how we could do better.
I guess I have a, you heard my question to Mr. Adezato there about, you know, obtaining third party or, you know, outside the VA care. And really it was up to the VA to develop the plan for how to implement choice. And they said that they couldn't do it internally, and so they got these third party payers, and now that doesn't seem to be working too good. So why didn't we do that in the first place? Now, I mean, why don't we do what we're talking about here in the first place? And I know that somebody mentioned that, oh, it's a pilot program and we found out this doesn't work. Give me your thoughts as to how we can make this work better, getting care in the community.
Yeah. So it's true, sir, that we had a pretty short timeline to get that program up and running. Was really our first time out of the chute with a program like that, of that magnitude and with those requirements. I think as the program has evolved and as Congress has given us additional authorities and flexibilities with the program, it's getting better. I would say that I'm probably as unhappy with the TPAs as the veterans are. We are working hard to hold them accountable to their contractual obligations. We have sent some of them letters of correction so that they are required to correct some of the deficiencies. So I'd say it's a work in progress. But let me give you an example of something that Congress has done recently that is going to help us really tremendously. So the provider agreements that we're asking for legislative authority for. We already have that under the choice legislation. So currently, our choice providers don't provide home and community care, for example. But with our provider agreement authority, we are now going to be able to set up our own agreements with those home and community care providers, and we're going to be able to use choice funding to pay for that care. That is a terrific opportunity for us to really open up access to that care.
I guess I understand that. It's just that you guys set up this third-party administration of the choice program providers. Now you're saying it's not working out, right? I mean, I don't get why we didn't do it right the first time.
Yeah. I think we tried the best we could, and I think we're trying to make it work, and it's getting better.
Well, I mean, I agree that we should have one way of doing it.
Yeah.
And coordinated way rather than having, 6 different techniques of getting people into the private sector.
And you have now legislated us, and you have told us that we must find a way to do that, which is going to be coming forward to you, I think, in later this month, to tell you what our plan is to do that.
Yeah, we're going to do another hearing tomorrow.
Yeah.
All right. Ms. Brownlee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have 2 quick questions on the Ms. Walorski's bill on Veteran Mobility Safety Act. So you stated that the VA simply pays for the adaptive equipment, that you're not, building or constructing the adaptive equipment. So when, she cited a couple of different examples of that veterans have incurred. And so when something happens to it's adapted improperly, the lift doesn't work, then what does the VA do then? The veteran comes back to you and says, it's not working, I paid for it, but my car's still not working for me. Do you just pay again?
No.
That's it?
No, we don't pay again. So when, I'm not familiar with those 2 cases, but theoretically, that could happen anywhere. It could happen under a certification program or a state certified program as well.
But what do you do?
Well, we would go back and try to help the veteran get the problem remedied. If it were really serious, I presume we would report that vendor to the transportation safety folks. I think, we don't have regulatory authority, but we try to resolve the problem for the veteran if we can. And, if we see a pattern of unsafe installments, I am sure we will be very quick to report that to the appropriate federal authorities.
So do you have success in rectifying this for veterans who have these experiences?
I believe so, and I personally was involved in a case where we went back to the vendor several times to get the modification corrected, and it was eventually corrected.
So do you have data on that?
I can ask, and if we do, we can provide that to you.
Okay, very good. And on the marriage and family therapists, so what are the amount of openings across the country for mental health professionals and counselors? I don't have the data in front of me, but I know that we struggle with filling all of those positions. I know in my district, the turnover of that is very, very high. I'm still struggling with your opposition to this, because I feel like we should be doing everything possible. We obviously want highly qualified people, but I think that we need to do as much as we possibly can to make professionals available so that we can fill these positions, because I know in my own district, it's a big problem.
Right. So I'm going to defer the question to Mr. Hernandez here, but I would say that marriage and family therapists is not a classification of employees that we find difficulty filling. So I think we're really feel that the standards that we have are high standards, and we have some concern about going in a different direction with the standards. But to your question about openings and vacancies, I'll defer to Mr. Hernandez.
Thank you, Ms. Murphy. Ranking Member Brownlee, currently we have a total of 51 vacancies of which 40 of them are already in the recruitment process. So we do not have a high number of vacancies for
This
those.
is specifically for your definition of marriage and family therapists. And so what about, across the board in terms of other counselors and other mental health professionals?
I don't have those numbers in front of me, Ranking Member, but I do know that for the family marriage therapists, we have 7 of those vacancies. For the licensed professional mental health counselors, we have 34 vacancies.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Kaufman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Murphy, you characterized the legislation before us today, or being discussed before us today on military sexual trauma, as that you already have the authority to do that under the Choice Act, so the issue is already taken care of. That's simply not true. The way this legislation is written is that it is not contingent upon distance from a VA facility, nor is it contingent upon wait time. It makes one eligible from day one who has an incident of military sexual trauma. So I'm just surprised at your testimony before this committee. Could you explain that?
Thank you, sir. Yes, with the new authorities that you gave us, we no longer have to wait the 30 days if there's a clinically indicated need for the service. So basically, if a clinician or a physician or a patient feels they need it today, and that becomes a clinically indicated date, and that service, they are eligible for choice today. There's no longer any enrollment constraint, so anybody enrolled at any time can take advantage of choice. We also have the undue burden criteria, where if it is an undue burden for a veteran to travel a certain distance or to get to a VA facility, they are also eligible under choice.
Here's a problem with that. They have to navigate your bureaucracy to get there, which is so hard to do. I mean, it is unfriendly to veterans, it is unfair to veterans, and so what this legislation does is it automatically places them as eligible. And so despite your testimony, I would strongly urge my colleagues today to support that legislation. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufman. Ms. Custer, questions? Oh, okay. Mr. DeCano?
Ms. Murphy, in his testimony, Mr. Fuentes mentioned that veterans in extended care facilities are in danger of losing access to their homes because VA can't extend the contract. Can you explain the situation? Would the VA's proposed legislation help, or would the bill text need to be revised to impact those veterans?
So, thank you, sir. Are you referring to the provider agreement legislation?
I think so. That's right.
Right. So the way we have used those vehicles is there are often small nursing homes or community living centers or home and board and care facilities, not board and care, sorry, that doesn't qualify, but home health agencies, aid and attendance, where we are able to use a vehicle called a provider agreement rather than a FAR-based contract to procure those services. What we have learned as we began to try to find ways to continue those agreements, that we really are being pressed to use FAR-based contracts. And some of those providers are dropping out because if you're a small family-run agency or a small business, it is very difficult to comply with FAR-based requirements. Our provider agreements give us another vehicle that has protections, such as those that are provided to Medicare providers, and has constraints, but does not have all of the requirements of a FAR-based contract. And thus, some of our smaller providers, our community providers, our one-doc shops, we hope will be more willing to stick with us and continue to serve veterans.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned briefly that the VA would like to make additional improvements on the draft bill on care in the community that we're discussing today. Could you go into a little bit more detail on that?
So, I'm sorry, sir, which bill are you referring to?
Excuse me? The provider agreement.
So, I'm going to turn it over to Susan as our legal. Eagle here.
Yes, Senator Blumenthal introduced S2179, and we noted that it more clearly articulated some of the protections for employment opportunities, more so than the draft bill that the administration introduced in May. So it's really clarifying those portions.
Okay, great. Well, I agree with the intent of the VA Billing Accountability Act. Veterans deserve to know what they are expected to pay in a timely manner. I understand the VA puts a 90-day hold on bills to veterans when other health insurance is involved. This is to allow VA to collect from third-party payers before billing the veteran. How does that compare to the industry standard? Would that initial hold period make the 120-day timeline unworkable? Would that period need to also be revised? What billing and processing improvements would VA need to do to meet the 120-day limit? If 120 days is not feasible, what limit would be acceptable to the VA?
Sir, I would point out that you're giving the private sector 18 months, and you're giving us 120 days. So there's a little bit of imbalance there. I think we would just, the 120 days is just too fast for normal business processes. We're relying on the other health insurance to actually accept our bill, accept it as a clean claim, pay it timely. We rely on them to have their bill processing in order. Claims sometimes go back and forth because they disagree with what we've got on there or they want more additional information. So sometimes it just takes more time. The other thing that happens is that sometimes our copay bills are delayed because we have a process of verifying a veteran's income, and we use the IRS database for that. So sometimes veterans will appear based on the income that they have declared not to owe a copay, but when we go through the IRS verification process, which is sometimes out in the future after the people have filed their taxes, we sometimes find that the IRS tells us that the income that the veteran has declared is not accurate. And in fact, they are now liable for copays. And so we want to be able to bill those copays for which the veterans are liable, even though that's well beyond the 120 days. So I guess what I'm saying is that that is too limited a time frame for us to work in. It's too small a box for us to be able to manage this appropriately. And I mean, the opportunity for us to lose revenue that veterans actually owe. I mean, obviously, if we made a mistake, we need to own that. But we also need a little bit more time to work in.
Back.
Mr. O'Rourke, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Murphy, first of all, thanks for the offer to work with us, because if you're already tracking some of this, then I agree, we want to look at this, but I agree we don't want to duplicate efforts and spend more money, and we just want to get to an accurate measure and understanding of veterans' experiences in their own words or by their own measure. I think that's important. Where can I find the SHEP survey that you referenced?
We will send it to you.
Where could a veteran in my district find the SHEP survey?
I think it's on a link. I think the link, we'll send you the link.
So I spent the last, and David, who's behind me, spent the last 20 minutes searching for SHEP VA survey, Survey of Healthcare Experiences of Patients, which is what SHEP stands for, El Paso VA survey. We can't find it online. So I don't doubt that it exists. It's not accessible, and I think that lack of accessibility is connected to a lack of accountability. Part of the reason we want to do this is we want the VA, and frankly my office, to be accountable for the performance of the VA. And I'm a big believer in that which is accurately measured tends to improve. And when people don't know what those measures are, it makes it harder for us to direct resources or prioritize accordingly. How did you measure wait times? How were wait times measured or asked for in the SHEP survey?
They don't ask specifically for wait times. They ask questions like, did you get an appointment when you called? Did you get an appointment when you wanted it? Did you have to wait more than 15 minutes past your appointment time? When you called, when you needed an urgent care appointment, did you get it when you wanted it?
So the SHEP survey doesn't ask for wait times, so we have no independent check on what the VA has been telling us, which was wrong in Phoenix, it was wrong in El Paso. I think it's actually still wrong today because you do preferred appointment, which is a concoction that I don't understand. I understand the veteran requests an appointment on day one, and I understand he or she is seen at a certain date thereafter. The period between, one and whenever that date is the wait time. I don't know why you don't measure it that way, but our survey does. So does the SHEP survey measure access to mental health care?
It asks veterans if they felt they got an appointment when they needed it or wanted it.
Specific to mental health care?
I'd have to check. I
Okay,
think it
so
does.
our survey found that, as I mentioned earlier, more than 1/3 of veterans in El Paso did not have access to mental health care, could not make an appointment despite their best efforts to do so. When we brought that to the VA's attention, and when we hammered the VA, frankly, on this huge gap in service, that helped the VA to prioritize resources where they were most needed. It's not too hard to connect care denied, frankly, absolutely denied, to the high rate of veteran suicides, and we have those in El Paso. So that's where I found this survey to be incredibly useful to us. If I understand you correctly, the SHEP survey says, were you happy with your service? Were you seen when you wanted to be seen? It doesn't give us an independent check or verification on numbers and data that you give us, which is what we need and what I think veterans would be far happier with, and what I, as a member of Congress with oversight responsibility, would be far happier with than just trusting you that you're seeing veterans within the certain amount of period or the certain period of time that you say they are. So if SHEP survey does not do all those things, then I don't think you have a compelling case against the Ask Veterans Act. Now, I'm very happy to take you up on your offer. I'll meet with you. If, in fact, the SHEP survey does all those things that today we're not sure about, then let's just publish it, make sure everybody can see it, and let's hold everyone responsible accountable. But if not, then I think we need to have, I would love to have your support on the Ask Veterans Act. And lastly, Mr. Chairman and Madam Ranking Member, this is not rocket science to design these surveys. It's not incredibly expensive. We spent about $6,000 of our office's resources to conduct these surveys to get it within a margin of error under 4%. If we don't pass this legislation, if the VA does not want to implement it on its own, I'd be very happy to show any office how to do this, or at least how we did it, and it could certainly be improved upon. So with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Any other questions? Well, thank you for being here this morning. I appreciate that. Let's see. The panel is excused. I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material. So without objection, so ordered. I'd like to once again thank all of our witnesses and the audience members for joining us this morning. The hearing is now adjourned.